Now, let me test your understanding of newspapers. First of all, you must have read this article about Supreme Court judgment, right? Economic criterion is not sole basis for creamy layer. Now, use the chat box to tell me whether it's a progressive judgment or a regressive judgment. Progressive means forward looking, regressive means backward looking. So, is it a positive judgment or a negative judgment? You can use a chat box. It's a regressive judgment. Regressive means backward looking. Okay. Forward looking, progressive judgment. Okay. Why, Anukya? Why do you think it's a regressive judgment? There are no judgments. I just want to know who, like, it's progressive or regressive. In my view, one who is economically strong is socially too. Okay. So this article, reading this article might be very easy for you because most of you must have remembered that creamy layer concept. First of all, what is creamy layer? Yes, because you remember creamy layer, it takes a less time to understand this particular article. Now, I hope all of you remember creamy layer applies only to the other backward classes section. That is the only place where creamy layer system is applicable, right? And this is a progressive judgment, not regressive. We have to understand two different things here. Economic criteria not sole basis for creamy layer. Why? Here you have to understand the Indian society perspective. You might make 1 lakh rupee per month, okay, but I'm not generalizing. I'm saying if you are making 1 lakh rupee of month also, but if you belong to scheduled caste, still there is a very high chance that if you go back to your village, people look down at you on the basis of your caste. Okay, they might talk to you. The salad bowl concept might come into the picture. That means in city everybody is equal. In cities everybody is treated on the basis of their own living standard. If I own an apartment in Banjara Hills or Jubilee Hills, I'm treated as a rich person. If I don't have that, so money is a criteria in a salad bowl. That means in urban settings. In a software job, your talent to code is considered as a progressive thing, right? But if you go back to villages or society in general, you might find such people in cities also. They treat you still on the basis of your caste, right? So economic empowerment is not equal to social empowerment. This does not automatically translate into social empowerment. That stigma will still stay with you. Okay, this is the first bubble we have to burst or to be able to understand. Yes, that is what I'm saying. Even in cities, even in the highest, even in Jubilee Hills, Banjara Hills, you will find people who treat people on the basis of caste. Richness is not equal to common sense, right? Okay, so PhD is not equal to common sense. You might find very people with 3 or 4 PhDs still doesn't have common sense. It's quite natural. Okay, vice versa is true. People who haven't even passed 10th class might have all the wisdom in the world. So coming back to this particular judgment, the judgment is saying if you take people on the basis of social advancement and economic status, it will also eliminate a lot of people. Just imagine son of an IAS or IPS, okay, or a scientist, a group A officer, right? Why should these people still get the reservation system or avail the reservation system? He's already empowered. IAS, that is the highest post any Indian can dream, right? Apart from politics, job wise. So when you are already that, why should your children have such kind of advantages? So it's a very progressive judgment for understanding sake. So no need to remember this. We have other important cases to discuss. But remember what is the creamy layer concept. Next. Is this article present in Hyderabad edition? Have you read this? Tamil Nadu launches urban employment scheme. So what is so special about this article that we have to discuss? The term urban employment. Why it's important? Have you read this article, anyone?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Particularly urban employment, because it specifically says that in Tamil Nadu almost 53% youth
Mm-hmm.
are in urban areas.
Mm.
Uh, and also it's like this rural and urban percentages is different for different states. Some
Okay.
states have 75% rural, 25 urban. Some states have 50-50. In that case, Tamil Nadu has more tilted towards the urban population.
Okay. Nice. Right. So to understand this pan India level or at universal level, we will look at a simple diagram. We have seen this diagram in the earlier class as well. Let's imagine industry. In economics or in UPSC, always use common sense and take the simplest example possible. The most simplest example which we can understand. Let's imagine Maggie, right? Maggie company is there. Of course, it's Nestle, but Maggie company is there. Maggie company is having 10 employees. Okay. As of today, 100 Maggie packets are consumed throughout India every day. So 10 employees are there, right? When these 10 people have jobs, what do? They spend. Will they eat Maggie only? No, right? Just because they are working in Maggie, they don't eat Maggie. They will buy rice, they will buy other products, right? So when they start spending these other products, okay, other companies will also hire people. Yes or no? Someone in the rice industry for packing and all those things. They will create jobs. So in this way, more jobs will lead to more. Sorry, the diagram is wrong. Spending, double spending. That means because I have a job, I am spending somewhere else. It is creating more jobs. That is leading to more spending, and more spending will expand the industries. What I'm trying to tell you here is when people start spending in an economy, okay, it will have spillover effects. It will create demand for other products, or it will create more jobs. All these activities will lead to what? Expansion of industries. That means Maggie will be forced to produce 125 items. So for that, I need 15 people or 12 people or 13 people. So more jobs. So it's what we call as virtuous cycle. Okay, when you read economic survey, it will be explained in a better fashion, but it's a simple story. In the same way, right now, just imagine India. Rishi, please mute. Okay. In India, the other day we have seen formal sector, informal sector, right? Most of the informal people live in rural areas. At the same time, we cannot assume all the people live in urban areas only. So informal labor is in formal and informal, right? Now, has the classes covered revenue expenditure, capital expenditure? I mean, do you know what is the difference between revenue expenditure and a capital expenditure? Basic economic. Okay, fine. If you know, that's fine. If not covered in the class, it's totally fine. Now, India, just imagine India as a industry. What do industries need to do? Industries needs to create consumption capacities. That means there are so many schemes targeted towards rural poor. Okay, Nareka, direct benefit transfers, Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana. Yes, so all these schemes are targeted towards urban rural people, But in urban area also, not everybody is rich, right? We cannot assume everybody in urban area is making good money. Okay, that is where the term urban poor actually came into the picture. Okay, so that means people from rural area came to urban area to escape what? Poverty, because there is no activity or agricultural production in rural area, droughts, destruction of crops, no employment. They came to urban area for a better lifestyle. This is what we call as migration. This is a huge problem in this country. Why? There are no jobs in rural area, so people are coming into urban area. So are they becoming Ambanis when coming to urban area? Those things only happen in the movies. In reality, in urban area also they are poor. That is where the term urban poor will come into the picture. So for understanding sake, I will tell you, if this is below poverty line, okay, if you are hovering just here, you are urban poor. That means you are not so poor that you can be called as BPL. At the same time, you are not so rich that you can be called as a person who is making decent amount of money. Urban poor is person who is barely surviving. He barely survives. Okay, you understand the difference of urban poor? He is not so poor that he is BPL. He is not so rich that government need not do anything for him. He is somewhere in between. In mythology, we have this Trisanka Swargam, right? Like in between place. Okay. For Inception fans, it's like limbo. You are in a limbo. You are neither here nor there. So for these people, urban, there is no scheme as of now. So that is why this urban employment scheme is very, very important. Now Tamil Nadu is doing it. Just imagine all India level. That is what is demanded. So Nobel laureates and all these people have suggested direct benefit transfers to these people. So that is what it is. So you understand the impact. In rural we have schemes, in urban we don't have schemes. Migration is happening 24/7. People are coming. So to keep them away from poverty, we have to give them some kind of money. But at the same time, we will make them do some work, not total free money. A very, very interesting article by Faizan Mustafa. Faizan Mustafa is the Vice Chancellor of Nalsar University. He writes very good articles, and he also have a YouTube channel. If you are on YouTube, you can follow him. He is very balanced in a way. He is not totally in anyone's stand. He has a lot of legal knowledge. He gives you good analysis on a lot of topics. Now coming to this particular article, it's a very straightforward article. It's about National Automated Facial Recognition System in India. Now, all of you know what is facial recognition. Some of you might have, face lock, unlock, face unlock as an option in your iPhones or something. So that's the simplest way to use facial recognition technology. On the other hand side, if you are an executive, that is the police officers or the state for surveillance usage. Now government is also considering for DBT transfers or money exchange. If you go to China right now, instead of using UPI or QR code, your face will debit the money. Once you purchase something in a shop, once you walk out, automatically a certain amount of money is deducted from your bank balance. Why? You are the person who have shopped. So facial recognition will open bus doors, train tickets, everything. It makes your life very, very, very easy. You don't have to do anything. You go to Amazon shop, you purchase everything, walk out, still you are billed exactly for the amount of goods you have taken. Zero contact, especially in pandemic times. All these technologies have made life very easy for people. So that is one side of the coin. On the other hand side, we are seeing a lot of potential misuse. Right now, which all GS papers can we link this particular article to? GS paper 1, 2, 3.
Science and technology and social security.
GS3 science and technology, very good. GS3 security also. GS to governance. Yes, GS to social justice. That means subsidies are directly given to you. You all you have to go to is go to a ration shop, show your face, automatically your uh, goods will be given to you, because nobody can claim you, right? We are not in a Mission Impossible movie where people will wear masks, right? Next, and I think ethically also there are lot of ramifications. Okay, you can definitely and directly link it to ethics paper as well. So how intrusive? So what is the moral behind artificial morals behind artificial intelligence? What is the limitations on states intrusion? That's a moral choice. That's an ethical choice. Yes. So we have to link it to GS paper 4 as well. How much is okay? Who will draw that line? How much intrusion is considered as national security? Yes. Let's say somebody wants to surprise their family members. Okay, he's wearing a facial recognition. I mean, he's hiding from the system. That does not make him a criminal. And you know, the world is such a beautiful place. Thanks to internet, we come to know so many stories. In USA, a particular city has installed this facial recognition technology and used artificial intelligence to predict crimes. Okay, this is a true story. I'm not making up. Those who want to watch some fiction, there's a series called as Person of Interest. Person of Interest. I think it's available on Amazon Prime. Okay, it's about America program called as Prism, where every phone call, every mail is recorded, everybody is observed 24/7, and they will predict crimes. Okay, that particular algorithm predicted one single individual around 95% of the time. Either he will be a victim or he will be involved in a crime. Okay, just because he's a Black American and he's born in a particular neighborhood, that algorithm labeled him twice or thrice that he is going to either commit a crime or he's going to be in a crime. Okay, predictive algorithms have never worked successfully in anywhere in the world, not even in USA. Okay, so that's one way to look at the things. I'm just giving you multiple styles of facial recognition technology. Whereas if you watch a YouTube video on Uyghur Muslims, the same Uyghur Muslims he mentions in the article, China, right? A journalist from an international institute goes to China. He just wants to test that particular system, facial recognition system. In less than 1 minute, he was identified even in a crowd. Okay. If you remember Hong Kong riots, okay, people were wearing masks. Okay, all these are different styles of mechanisms where system will try to control you. Let's say okay, Nirbhaya rape case, I hope all of you remember, or Priyanka Reddy case in your own memory. When such things happen, people will come in protest in groups into a public sphere. Okay, each and every individual is facially recognized and identified. Okay, somebody else might throw a stone at the government building, right? Still you are also included in that particular lawsuit. You may not have done anything but peacefully participate in a protest, still you have been accused of a particular crime. Yes, all these are various ways to look at the usage of facial recognition technology. Yes. Now, is it a good thing or a bad thing? Okay. So the first answer should be never reduce it to binary. Yes, it's not as simple as that. Yes, very good. So that is exactly why I have asked that question, not to see it in a binary vision. We cannot reduce everything to yes or no. Okay. By the way, if you don't know, if you are from Hyderabad, you are living in the second most CCTV coverage city in the India. Okay, we have around 50 lakh CCTV cameras officially. So we will be beating that record. We will be number one soon. Don't worry about it. Just informing you if you are in Hyderabad. So this discussion is even ridiculous because we already are under a lot of surveillance and none of us actually care. Right. So from security point of view, from national security point of view, from executive point of view, right? For public service delivery and other activities, facial recognition technology is fantastic. It will make my life very easy. After installation of the CCTV cameras in Hyderabad, bike thefts have come down very heavily because it doesn't matter which street you turn into, some CCTV camera will definitely recognize you or catch you. Okay, what is the point of stealing a bike? Okay, so this is actually a fact. Next, what are the bad things that are there? First one is privacy violation. My privacy is violated. But you can also think of a common thing. Once you are in a public place, there is no such thing as privacy, right? If you are on the road, what is there to break your privacy? So if I'm sending that CCTV camera into your home, your living room, your bedroom, your kitchen, then I'm violating your privacy. Anyhow, you are in the middle of the road, which is a public place. In public place, how can I give you extra privacy? Have you thought in those lines? You are in a mall, right? What is there for privacy? You're in a public place, 10,000 eyes are watching you, if not a CCTV camera. Clear? So these are all the things that you need to analyze and think, because this is a long-term and evolving topic. There is no definitive answer, which is it's a good thing or a bad thing, or should we use it or not. But the most ultimate problem comes down when, if I say it's okay to watch me 24/7 as long as I'm in a public sphere, okay, what guarantees do I have that it won't be misused? Just like the Pegasus, right? Let's imagine a politician wants to know, follow you 24/7. There is no better heaven for him than to use a facial recognition technology. Your every move, everything is observed. Your privacy is violated in that sense. Okay, it is misused. It is misused to target someone politically or for some personal reasons. That is where the ethical lines are blurred. Okay, if you tell me that CCTV cameras are all looked to a artificial intelligence, okay, no human being can look into that feeds. If there is a crime, only then with the judge's permission we will take that particular bit. Okay, rest of the time human beings should not be manually watching everyone. Everybody will be watched equally. If somebody is behaving in a suspicious manner, the artificial intelligence will alarm us or warn us. Or if there is a criminal who is roaming in the crowd, artificial intelligence will send a message to the police officer. Right? Such kind of systems are always appreciated because privacy breach is very less. But if you say a individual has to be has the power to observe me, he might type your name or Rahul Gandhi's PA or Amit Shah's driver. So these people can be targeted. It's privacy violation. It's very risky. Clear? So these are all the things that you need to understand in different ways. Okay. Now, two important judgments we will observe and we will move on from this particular article. The first one is Puttaswamy versus Union of India case. I told you when this name will come 100 times, please focus. Puttaswamy versus Union of India, right to privacy judgment. Samyukta, please mute. Yeah. Okay. So the other one is Anuradha Basin versus Union of India. This is also a very important judgment. No issues. This is also a very progressive judgment. This is given in relation to the Jammu and Kashmir internet lockdown issue. Okay. Now we will understand two different things. First is Puttaswamy versus Union of India gives us right to privacy, whereas Anuradha Basin comes from Puttaswamy judgment and it has given 4 tests. Okay, the most important being, is the state using the least intrusive measure? Okay, again understand, is the state using the least intrusive measure? What do I mean by that? If there is a issue going in Hyderabad, do I really need to cut down internet of entire Hyderabad or need to cut down internet of only that particular area? Okay, normally speaking, they will cut down entire internet of entire Telangana. Okay, that need not be necessary. Least intrusive, that means, is this the last best option? First of all, should I cut down internet? Which area? How is it least intrusive? Are there any other measures to stop this? Okay, after all these tests are tested, okay, only then a particular decision has to be taken by the state. That is exactly what this article also discusses. Need, what is the need for a facial recognition system? Are there less intrusive measures? Right? Are there any less intrusive measures? Police intelligence is failing, or police are unable to find any criminal in any other way, only then they should resort to the facial recognition. Yes, it should have the highest standards. That means if somebody face has to be identified in the crowd using algorithm, that should be the last resource. Human intelligence failed, other techniques failed, the last measure is facial recognition, then it is fine. Okay, so such kind of measures have to be created, only then facial recognition systems will be encouraged or entertained, right? And he talks about false positives. I totally agree with that, but the thing is, we have no clue on how government is planning to use this kind of technologies. So we are just talking in hypotheticals. That means government might be doing this, government might be doing that. Okay, in reality, government might bring a bill which says facial recognition technology will be used only for escaped convicts, criminals, or other people who are whom government is unable to arrest in last 6 months. Then all this discussion will become useless. Just imagine a crowd of 1,000 people are there, right? So we have some potential terrorists. We have CCTV cameras in and around that particular area. That CCTV camera will identify this particular individual as the terrorist. Only that person will be arrested. Law and order, security wise, it's the most safest measure. Okay, are we going to use like this? Maybe, we don't know. That is the problem, right? Government has not created a bill or any legal backing telling us how these technologies are going to be used, who will have the access, can the names be entered manually, will there be judicial scrutiny, will parliament have accountability mechanism, right? How much budget is being spent, what is the outcome? None of these things are out in the public domain. That means once a bill is created, data protection bill or personal data protection bill, how these things will come into the picture will be noticed, then continuation will happen. Are we clear? Sorry. Yes. See, civil liberty is a very, very powerful term. We don't know that. We cannot loosely use it. There will be definitely misuse of all technologies, not any one single technology. So do we respect privacy in this country?
Yes.
Sorry? Your voice broke. What were you saying? Still the same? Yes, sir, we respect privacy. Okay, one simple question. What is the privacy alternative in your mother tongue?
Try to.
Yeah, in your mother tongue, what is the closest term related to privacy in your own mother tongue? In Telugu, in Kannada? I can't hear you actually.
Canada.
You can use a chat box. There is nothing called privacy in mother tongue. Okay, Gopyata is secrecy. Gopyata is secrecy, right? Ekantam is also aloneness or loneliness. It's not privacy. Right? So technically speaking, there is no one vernacular equivalent closer to privacy.
व्यक्तिगत सर व्यक्तिगत गोप्यता
Vyaktigata Gopyata, yes, it's an extension. Then yeah, then we can probably link it. Then where does this word come from? Definitely, it is not introduced or created by our ideals. That is what I'm trying to tell you, right? It comes from the Latin origins of liberty, equality, fraternity. The privacy is an extension of that thought process. Yes, seclusion. Right. So again, my intention is not to test your or my vernacular language or all these things. I'm just trying to tell you that privacy is a bit kind of alien thing for the society to understand that easily. Your relatives will directly come and start asking you what is your salary. Yes, what is your caste. A stranger might ask you what is your caste in the middle of the road, or your friend might just open your purse without any common sense, just like that. So all these things are not ingrained into us because we don't think that is privacy. He is my friend, what will happen if I open his purse? So again, I think we don't know the lines to draw at individual levels, right? So that is societal morality versus constitutional morality. I'm just trying to give you some ideas about understanding privacy, how deep or how small privacy is or how big privacy is. Right. Now, any more questions from that particular article? Okay. So then there is one more article about caste census, caste counts. We have discussed this few days ago itself. What is the intention? If you are creating it with bona fide intention, that is to empower the people, caste census is good. But if you are using it for political tool, then caste census is bad. There are a lot of issues with the caste census also, because it will lead to caste consolidations. It might lead to further fragmentation of the society. Yes, and it can be used as a political tool. Then someone asked me, it might also lead to better representation in the democracy. So that is a good hope. We did discuss all these points, right? Whatever you have read in this particular editorial, more or less the same points have been discussed in the class also. Okay. Any confusion, anything you didn't understand in this article? Have you read it? That is the first question I should be asking. Have you read this article? Okay, so no doubts. Self-explanatory article. Okay, so a lot of smart people. Okay. What about this article? Who wants to explain this this article to the rest of the class? Climate change, a catalyst for Arctic cooperation. Anybody want to try summarizing this article? Don't be afraid. Don't be, you know, don't have fear of judgment. Like, what will others think? What if I am wrong? Remove it. UPSC is also a personality development, right? That is why it's called personality test, not interview.
Sir,
Yes,
to be
please.
short,
Mhm.
particularly it's regarding the climatic concerns in the Arctic region,
Mhm.
and then the countries that are having direct access or that are directly geographically linked to this region are
Mhm.
basically Russia and the NATO countries,
Mhm.
which had for many decades they had conflicts in terms of military and all.
Mhm.
So one underlining point is for cooperation, keeping those things aside and working towards this climatic goals, like allowing others, and then in that sense.
Okay. So, like, how does melting Arctic or opening of Arctic sea lanes going to bring in cooperation in relation to climate change? Okay, so Anuhya is saying the research in oceanography. Okay, the geopolitical fight and strategic relation between NATO and Russia is causing threat to climate change in Arctic region. So let me rephrase the entire article into simple terms. I hope this is Arctic, right? So as you can see, it's a closed ice based area. I mean, you can imagine the rest of the world here. But the thing is, till now, thanks to weather or climate in the long run, okay, this entire region is linked to ice. It's totally, it does not have a navigable zones. You cannot travel through Arctic very easily. And every country had some share with Arctic, right? Russia and all these countries, all these neighboring countries to Arctic region have some connection to Arctic region. Now, what is happening is because of climate change, new sea lanes are being opened up. Okay, so climate change is happening elsewhere. Climate change is affecting Arctic region, right? Because these new sea lanes have opened, till now unseen possibilities are opening up. What do I mean by that? Let's imagine China. China right now has to go through Southeast Asian Sea, the Malacca Straits, Indian Ocean, right? Cross Africa or enter into the African Suez Canal area and do business with the Middle East or Western Eastern European countries. Okay, so this is a bottleneck for China. Suez Canal is a bottleneck for China. and it has to travel all the way from here to here. If it's Africa, you have to cross Africa, right? Now what is happening? China is a good friend to Russia, right? And because of Arctic sea lanes, it can travel into new areas. So the old geostrategic bottlenecks can be bypassed. Suez Canal is controlled by friends of USA. The Malacca Strait and other states are controlled by friends of USA, that is India. That is why we have quadrilateral, right? So if new sea lanes are there, I can totally bypass this orange thing and move directly into this red zone. Yes, so that's one way to look at the things. That means climate change is opening up new geostrategic challenges and issues, right? And none of these countries are having any long-term vision. There is no long-term vision. There is no long-term policy. And Russia plus China are UNSC permanent 5 members, P5 members. They have veto power. They can technically do whatever they want to do. Yes, and small countries, unless they are backed by USA and entire globe, that please don't destroy these particular Arctic circles by driving more vessels. Once you start bringing in human activity, automatically the melting of ice will only accelerate. It will not slow down, right? And sorry, also think about mineral plus oil exploration that will happen in Arctic Circle. Till now it was untapped. Now Russia probably will go to that particular area and say, yes, here is a huge amount of oil. This land belongs to me. Okay, then it's very difficult for all these countries to say, please don't do this, Russia. For Russia, it's money. For other countries, it's climate change. It becomes a very, very difficult concept. So that is why we should be proactive. We should have a long-term vision, and all the countries should come together for this cooperation. If you're not cooperating now and setting ground rules, okay, it will be too late for the world. That's the major takeaway, or the simplest way to remember this entire topic. I hope this article makes more sense right now after this simple example.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, obviously, if I am China, if I am Russia, there is money involved for me. There is geostrategic advantage involved for me. So I will explore, I will exploit. But it is for the rest of the world to convince them that our planet is very fragile. We are going through a very tough period for climate change. If we are not rectifying our climate disasters or climate exploitation, we are going to see a lot of problems. Now, why it's important? Because if two big players fight, somebody else is victimized. What will happen when Arctic region ice is melted? In 2050, probably the Goa beach will be under the ocean, right? Small island nations will be drowning under ocean. Yes, new viruses might come into the picture. That's fine. I mean, we don't know how climate change will affect anything else. We have zero clue, right? We don't know how climate works or climate reaction works. Everything will lead to something else. Yes, so that is why it is very, very dangerous. Small islands will be drowning. Even India has a lot of coastal area. Just yesterday we have seen we have around 7,500 kilometers of coastal area. All those areas will be suffering from sea level rise. Yes, so forget about China and Russia. Think about India, small nation islands, Sri Lanka. There are n number of problems, and we are not even discussing about the poor animals. Yes, the fishes, the rest of the animals, we are not even considering them into the discussions. But oil exploration will lead to a lot of damage in this particular fragile ecosystems. So tons and tons of problems. In summary, it will only lead to destruction. There is no good outcome unless we come and discuss as one planet. Okay. So Mr. Prabhash Ranjan has written a very lengthy article. This article is about whether to legitimately recognize Taliban or not. There are two ways to recognize who can occupy. If you are occupying a particular area and providing all the basic services, then yes, you can be legitimately recognized. Then there is one more doctrine, that is democratic legitimacy. That means people has to recognize you through legitimate means, that is elections or some other ways. If I can recognize you in either of these ways, but most people try to prefer in democratic legitimacy. That means, are you elected democratically, yes or no? So India is still waiting and watching. It is not taking any decision. It is not in a rush to give legitimacy to the Taliban rule, right? So is the case with the rest of the world. So as I have told yesterday, we won't be discussing Taliban for hours together every day. 2 minutes, done. Democratic legitimacy, India might give recognition to Taliban. Afghanistan is still a country. We recognize Afghanistan, but we don't recognize Taliban. That distinction is very, very clear. Now it's a very interesting article. This is where you develop analysis and perspectives. And then will you explain the term government in exile? Government in exile means somebody has elected you as legitimately, like Ashraf Ghani. Okay, he is right now in a third country. So the entire government escaped to some other country. For example, if you see Dalai Lama and the Tibetans, okay, they are Tibetan government in exile. That means because the land of Tibet is under China control, but the people who elected or people who are elected in Tibet are living in India. So Tibet government in exile, Afghanistan government in exile. So the government ran off. That means prime minister has run off, cabinet has run off, but the country is still there. So that is what is meant by government in exile, because you are the one who was legitimately elected through an election. Some force came suddenly and started occupying your country. So you are still a prime minister, but you don't have a country. Clear? Yes. Now, rethinking perks for players. It's a very straightforward and simple article. What he is trying to tell you is, if you give gazetted officer post or higher post to a athlete, yes, they have zero clue on how to run the system. They don't have any training, they don't have any legitimacy, they don't have any understanding whatsoever of the organization, and they will destroy the organization. I mean, destroy in the sense, they will act as a bottleneck. They don't know how to function. After 35 years, she will come back and join as a DSP or an SP. Yes. Because it's government, I am the state government, right? It's my job. I can give it to anyone with GO, government order. All I have to pass is a government order and give job to a athlete. Yes, it's totally legal. It's totally the discretion of the government. It's a simple argument, but I want to expand this argument. What he is trying to tell you is, if let's say a sports person is given a DSP job, the system's performance is reduced by, let's say, 1%. That is what he is arguing, right? All of you agree with this much? Okay. Now think about it. A nobody, right? A literally nobody, or a businessman, or a crorepati, he suddenly brought and he is made into a member of parliament. Don't you think he will reduce the performance of the system by 5%? There is no criteria needed for politicians. You can literally pick up anyone, okay, and make him into an MP, and you can make him into a cabinet member, even worse, okay, and you expect him to perform. Don't you think this is also ridiculous? A criminal with 3 rape cases and 4 murder cases, he is a cabinet minister because he have crores of money through ill-gotten ways. Now he is a cabinet minister. He is minister for road transport. He doesn't know the meaning of constitution. He has never read constitution. He doesn't know the difference between national anthem and national song, right? But still he's a cabinet minister, and that is 100% legal. Okay, totally fine, and people are okay with it. Yes, but all of them are graduates. See, again, it's very easy. Most of them are graduates. Isn't it affecting the system's performance? So this is nothing but criminalization of politics. Okay, I assume most of you are totally innocent. For understanding sake, just hypothetically, how many people in parliament, parliament, there is something called as Lok Sabha, there is something called as Rajya Sabha, right? How many people do you think have criminal cases against them? That will be too much, right? Everyone is a bit on the higher side. How many of them are crorpatis? Crorepati, all of you understand the term crorepati, right? Mostly all of them are rich. So the answer is around 40% of Indian parliamentarians are people having criminal cases. Okay, and around 90% of Indian parliament is crorepati's, and the amount varies from anywhere between 2,500 crores to 5 crores. Okay, there are very few poor MPs in this particular country. So now what I'm trying to tell you is, if you are so bothered about this particular job given to a sports person, worry about your country, because most of them don't even know what constitutionalism is. Yes. So these are the real problems of India, which we never get to discuss. We have prime time debates, right? Salman Khan is stopped in a airport by a CRPF officer. That is the debate of this country. Okay, the officer doing job is also surprise to Indians. That is what is his job. That is what he's supposed to do in the first place. Okay, so I hope today's newspaper and some discussion gave you some perspectives, right? We will continue more